As you prepare for the final, I'd like you to take a look at a couple of key passages, and here's one that we're going to look at together. You can find this in your version of the text in chapter 2. So right before this, Victor Frankenstein is trying to get some relief from his emotional trauma, what he's experiencing, and he's wandering the Alps. You might go back and look at those passages, the description of the ice, of the mountains, of the sublimity of the landscape, and think about these romantic, with a capital R, ideas, right? How we can retreat to nature to get solace. We can retreat to nature to be alone with our thoughts, and that nature can somehow help us. The power of nature, something the Romantic poets were focused on. So he meets his creature. Victor Frankenstein meets the creature in this isolated, stark, but kind of majestic landscape. Think about what that could signify, and not only on a practical level, why it is that he meets the creature basically on a glacier, but also on a symbolic level, what that could mean. Think of coldness, vacancy, iciness, and connect that to Victor Frankenstein's personality, and also what Victor Frankenstein and his creature are going through. I think the landscape connects to what they're going through internally. So for me, this is on page 79 in the middle of the page. Wandering spirits, if indeed ye wander and do not rest in your narrow beds, allow me this faint happiness, or take me as your companion away from the joys of life. So he's talking to nature as he looks at these glittering peaks in the snow. He almost feels this elation and this joy, but as soon as he almost feels that, he sees the creature. As I said this, I suddenly beheld the figure of a man at some distance advancing toward me with superhuman speed. He bounded over the crevices in the ice, among which I had walked with caution. So we already know that the creature is more powerful and more agile than his creator. His stature also, as he approached, seemed to exceed that of man. I was troubled. A mist came over my eyes, and I felt a faintness seize me, but I was quickly restored by the cold gale or breeze of the mountains. I perceived, as the shape came nearer, sight tremendous and abhorred, that it was the wretch whom I had created. I trembled with rage and horror, resolving to wait his approach and then close him with mortal combat. You can see the ridiculousness of this idea that Victor Frankenstein, this young man, but still just a man, could actually win in a physical fight against his gigantic and strong creature. He approached. His countenance bespoke bitter anguish combined with disdain and malignity, while its unearthly ugliness rendered it almost too horrible for human eyes. But I scarcely observed this. Anger and hatred at first deprived me of utterance, and I recovered only to overwhelm him with words expressive of furious detestation and contempt. So we know that Victor Frankenstein is pretty preoccupied with appearance. Not only is he disgusted by his own creature, which does make sense given that he has selected body parts, but he did select the most beautiful body parts. But we know that a lot of times he conflates outward appearance with inward integrity or morality or goodness. He does this with Elizabeth, although Elizabeth is good inside and out. He also does this with his professors, Waldman versus Kremp. He listens to the professor Waldman, who's more attractive and explains things better and has the nice silver gray in his hair, and he doesn't like Kremp, who's kind of the grumpy and less attractive professor. So we know that Victor Frankenstein is very focused on outward appearance, but here he's also filled with rage. Devil, I exclaimed, do you dare approach me, and do you not fear the fierce vengeance of my arm wrecked on your miserable head? Begone, vile insect, or rather stay, that I may trample you to dust. And oh, that I could, with the extinction of your miserable existence, restore those victims whom you have so diabolically murdered. So, of course, Victor Frankenstein is hurting here, right? His brother has been killed by the creature, but imagine being met by your own father figure or your own creator with these horrible words being thrown at you. Words like vile insect, trample you to dust, extinction of your miserable existence. Obviously, this is going to have a profound effect on the creature. And yet the creature responds in this very enlightened, very mature adult way. I expected this reception. All men hate the wretched, and how then must I be hated who am miserable beyond all living things? Yet you, my creator, detest and spurn me, thy creature, to whom thou art bound by ties only dissoluble by the annihilation of one of us. You purpose to kill me. How dare you sport thus with life? Do your duty towards me, and I will do mine towards you and the rest of mankind. If you will comply with my conditions, I will leave them and you at peace. But if you refuse, I will glut the maw of death until it be satiated with the blood of your remaining friends. So, of course, he's giving a very violent threat here, right? But at the beginning of this paragraph, he sounds pretty calm and contained. He almost sounds more like the parent. And he points out some of the big flaws in Victor Frankenstein. Basically, what he says is, you have one duty toward me as my father, as my creator. Your duty lasts until one of us dies. That is your job as a father. So basically, the son, the creature, is telling his father what his duty is as a father. And I think he's right that as a father, Victor Frankenstein should have this responsibility. And of course, we're using that word father kind of metaphorically. So he's reminding Victor Frankenstein of his duties. Remember, Victor Frankenstein shirks his duties a lot. Not only does he forget to write back to his dad and to Elizabeth, and he kind of shirks some of his home duties, but you could also say he abandons his duty to nature and to mankind in creating this creature, and then even worse, at least in my opinion, than creating the creature, is what he does after. It's not even necessarily the mistake of creating the creature, it's abandoning that creature that is the horrific mistake that causes all of the conflict and all of the drama in the novel. So it's what he does and how he reacts after the initial mistake, in my opinion at least, is debatable, that is worse than actually creating this creature in the first place. He says, you want to kill me, but how can you sport thus with life? How can you take life and death in your own hands? So again, reminding the creator that he is not the ultimate creator, right? That he is viewing himself as a god and that that's wrong, that he doesn't have the right to bestow life or to kill somebody else. So he says, if you do this, if you comply with my conditions, and we know that one of the things he wants is to tell his story, to have him listen, and also to create a female for him, then I will not do all of these terrible things. So it's true, the creature is monstrous, right? He kills, he does awful things. He even rejoices later in the text in his power to kill and his power to inflict pain. But I would argue that a lot of this is to get back at the horrible abandonment and rejection that he has experienced, to get back at his father. We're not condoning it or saying it's right, but we can understand where he's coming from, even though he is violent. Abhorred monster, fiend that thou art, the tortures of hell are too mild a vengeance for thy crimes. Wretched devil, you reproach me with your creation. Come on then, that I might extinguish the spark which I so negligently bestowed. Again, we see that Promethean reference, right? Remember the text. The subheading is the modern Prometheus, so we see this other reference to the spark of life or the fire of life, bestowing fire to mankind. My rage was without bounds. I sprang on him, impelled by the feelings which can arm one being against the existence of another. He easily eluded me and said, be calm, I entreat you to hear me before you give vent to your hatred on my devoted head. Have I not suffered enough that you seek to increase my misery? Life, although it may only be an accumulation of anguish, is dear to me, and I will defend it. So we learn that this creature is very human in some ways. As terrible as he is, this seems very human, that life, even his own horrible life where he's been rejected, where he wasn't taught anything, where he had to learn everything on his own or by listening to the cottagers, life to him still means something. It's still sacred. There's something very human about this, whereas with Victor Frankenstein, it doesn't seem like life holds that same value since he's willing to play with life so kind of freely. Remember, thou hast made me more powerful than thyself. My height is superior to thine, my joints more supple, but I will not be tempted to set myself in opposition to these. What he's saying is, remember, you made me bigger and stronger, more agile than you, but I don't want to have to hurt you. This sort of reminds me of when a son might outgrow his father physically or even intellectually, and there's sort of a weird reversal. Here it's like Victor Frankenstein, the father, seems like this bratty child who wants to fight, and the creature saying, I'm bigger than you, I'm stronger than you, but calm down, just hear me, listen to my story. think there's also something very human in that, right? Asking someone to listen to your story, wanting to tell your story and to vent your emotions, that's very human. I don't think of that as being monstrous. So here you could argue that Frankenstein is more monstrous than the creature. I am thy creature, and I will be even mild and docile to my natural lord and king, if thou wilt perform thy part, the part which thou owest me. O Frankenstein, be it not equitable in every other, and trample upon me alone, to whom thy justice and even thy clemency and affection is most due. Remember that I am thy creature. I ought to be thy Adam, but I am rather the fallen angel whom thou drivest from joy for no misdeed. Everywhere I see bliss, from which I alone am irrevocably excluded. I was benevolent and good. Misery made me a fiend. Make me happy, and I shall again be virtuous. So there's a lot to unpack there. One is that the creature says he started out good. He wasn't born violent. He started out good. So it gets back to these theories about learning and about knowledge, right, that we talked about earlier, right? The idea of the blank slate, or do we start off good? Is it experience or is it nature? So he says, I started off good, but I turned violent because of my own misery. And you could argue that a lot of people who turn violent maybe turned violent because of circumstances or their own misery. It doesn't excuse it, but it does seem to be something that's very human. So it was not in his nature to be bad or to be violent. It was the situation that made him violent. He also references not only the Bible and Adam. So he says, I should be your Adam and you should be the God, right? I am the first man and you should be like the God. But instead, I am like Satan or Lucifer. I've been cast out by God. Not only cast out of the Garden of Eden, the way that Adam was, but cast out of heaven, right? This is a reference to the Bible, but also a reference to Paradise Lost. The creature reads Paradise Lost and views it as a real history and not a text or not literature. It's one of the few tools that he has to learn about emotions, about spirituality, about language. But also Victor Frankenstein references Paradise Lost frequently. But the creator responds, "Be gone, I will not hear you. There can be no community between you and me. We are enemies." I want to stop there. So this idea of community or human connection, I think, is really important. Victor Frankenstein, you could argue, is caught up between the heart and the head. So Victor Frankenstein, Walton, even the creature, are very focused on the head, right, on creating something, whereas characters who seem much more well-adjusted, even though we know what ends up happening to those characters, like Henry Clerval or Elizabeth or Frankenstein's parents, those characters seem much more kind of bound to the heart, to love, affection, community, connection. A lot of people who read this text argue it's not what Victor Frankenstein did. It wasn't creating a creature out of body parts and animating it that was a problem. It was doing this in isolation. Remember, he doesn't so it might not be that Victor Frankenstein's mistake is creating the creature. It could be that the mistake is creating this creature in isolation, without a scientific community, or without connecting to family members or to friends, without working through consensus. So you could argue that one of the themes or the warnings of this text is what happens when we work on a project alone in isolation. And think about it. When people say, oh, I worked on this master project that I had alone. It was a secret. I didn't tell anyone else about it. You might think that that project is something sinister. Whereas people who work on projects in community, reaching out to get help, consensus building, working with each other, that those projects might be projects that will help the planet or help discover something that wasn't discovered before. So it might be the isolation that causes the problem. Think about all of the benefits that Victor Frankenstein grows up with. He grows up with two really affectionate parents. Yeah, his father occasionally critiques some of the stuff that he reads, the alchemist that he reads, but both his father and mother are incredibly focused on their children's well-being and their children's education. Of course, Frankenstein's mother dies because she sacrifices herself to help nurse somebody else back to health, right? She's just that self-sacrificing. sacrificing. And Victor Frankenstein's father is constantly writing to him, asking him if he's okay, asking how he can help, asking what he needs, and then later in the text visiting him. So he's constantly forming community with his son, with Victor Frankenstein. Elizabeth is constantly trying to form community with her fiance, Victor Frankenstein, and ask, hey, come back, or do you not want to marry me? What's going on? Henry Clerval, too, he always seems to show up just when Victor Frankenstein needs him, whether it's right after he creates the creature and becomes very ill. Henry Clerval is somebody who's interested in the humanities and literature and human connection and always seems relatively upbeat and optimistic. Whereas Victor Frankenstein is much more closed off and is constantly closing doors or not wanting to have community with anybody. So I think this just highlights the contrast between every advantage that Victor Frankenstein had when it came to community and then all of the disadvantages that the creature grows up with. A little bit further down, finally, Victor Frankenstein agrees to listen to his tale. Keep remembering that we are listening to stories inside of stories. So think about what that does to the reliability. I think on the one hand, it makes the story seem more true. We have things like letters or documents that make this seem more real. But on the other hand, the fact that we have stories within stories might also call into question reliability and whether or not we trust these narrators.